The woman smelled like bread, warm bread, and something softer beneath it, lavender maybe, or the faint sweetness of soap that had been used many times but never wasted. Pearl lifted her head from the woven rug beside the bed. Morning was not fully awake yet. The light came in thin and gray through the small window, brushing the stone wall and catching the folds of the blankets. The woman slept. Pearl watched her for a long moment. Her tail twirled twice, quietly. Agnes, already awake, was perched on the window sill, nose twitching, eyes alert. Pearl knew something. Not in words, not in thoughts that could be explained, but in the way a scent lingers on the wind even when the source is gone. My people went that way. She stood slowly. Her paws made almost no sound on the floor. She padded to the side of the bed. The woman stirred slightly. Pearl hesitated. Then, with great deliberation, she placed her front paws on the edge of the bed and leaned forward. One quick lick across the woman's cheek. Soft, careful, a goodbye. The woman shifted, murmured something, and turned slightly, but did not wake. Pearl dropped back to the floor. Agnes was already at the door. Of course she was. Pearl huffed softly. Agnes glanced back as if to say, "Well?" Pearl followed. The door was not locked. It never was. The Drews family had moved about the house the day before with kind of a quiet openness, doors half open, voices low, movements gentle. Pearl nudged the door with her nose. It creaked. She froze. No one came. Agnes slipped through first, silent as a shadow. Pearl followed. Outside, the morning air was cool and sharp. The hills stretched outward in soft folds of gray and green. The scent hit her immediately. Faint, but unmistakable. Them. Pearl's head lifted. Her ears shifted forward. Her whole body leaned in that direction. Agnes was already moving. Pearl followed. They moved through the edge of the village quietly. A rooster crowed somewhere. A man stepped out of a doorway and stretched, looking toward the hills, but his eyes passed over them. A child ran across the path, chasing something visible. No one stopped them. No one called out. Pearl did not question it. She simply kept moving. The scent strengthened, not much, but enough. She could pick out pieces now, leather, dust, wool, and underneath it all, home. The land began to rise, rock underfoot, low scrub. The path narrowed. Agnes darted ahead, then back, then ahead again, weaving through stones and brush as if she had always known this land. Pearl followed more steadily, less quickly, but with a kind of determination that did not waver. At one point, they reached a stretch where the ground dropped away into a shallow ravine. Pearl stopped. She looked around, then across. The scent went that way. Of course it did. She huffed. Agnes had already disappeared. Pearl looked again. The drop wasn't impossible, just inconvenient. She lowered herself carefully, slid, caught herself, scrambled, made it down, climbed the other side. When she reached the top, Agnes was waiting, as if this had been obvious. Pearl snorted. They walked for a long time. The sun rose higher. The air warmed. The land changed. There was water nowhere. Less village, more open, more wind. At one point, Pearl stopped suddenly. Her ears flicked. Something was wrong. Not wrong like danger. Wrong like watching. She looked around. Nothing. The hills rolled on. The wind moved through the grass. A bird lifted into the air and circled. Agnes paused beside her, still, listening. Then Agnes moved forward again. Pearl hesitated, then followed. They did not know they were being watched. A man stood on a distant ridge, binoculars raised. He had seen them long before they had sensed him. He lowered the binoculars slightly. A bulldog, and something smaller. He frowned. Then slowly he lowered them completely. There was nothing threatening about them, nothing unusual, really. Animals wandered, animals crossed. They didn't know about boundaries. He turned away. Pearl moved on, unaware. The ground beneath them shifted. The rocks changed color, darker, rougher. The air felt different, more open, more exposed. They crossed a line they could not see, but something changed. The scent shifted, not weaker, just clearer, closer. At one point, they came upon a narrow fence line, not high, not solid, just enough to suggest division. Pearl stopped. Agnes did not. Agnes slipped through a small gap where the wire had loosened near the ground. Pearl stared, then lowered herself, wiggled, got stuck, backed up, tried again, succeeded, with dignity, well, mostly. They continued. The sun climbed higher. The air warmed further. The land began to soften, not as harsh, not as dry. Hints of green appeared in patches, trees in the distance. Pearl's pace slowed slightly, but her focus sharpened. The scent was stronger now. She could almost. She stopped, lifted her head, listened. Far off, faint voices. Her tail began to move. We had just gathered after breakfast. The light had shifted from morning gray to something warmer now, brushing the hills with gold. We had moved a little farther down from our campsite, settling near a natural clearing where the ground leveled out and a few scattered stones made something like a circle. Francis stood in the center, Claire behind him, Colby slightly behind, the Desert Father seated on a low rock. The rest of us, David, Mom, Dad, Elizabeth, Maria, Lucia, Sean, Aoife, Liam, and I, formed a loose semicircle. There was quietness to the morning. Not heavy, not tense, but purposeful. Francis looked around at us. Today, he said gently, we begin the Stations of the Cross. No one spoke. We will take one station each day, he continued, walking with Christ, not only toward Jerusalem, but toward understanding. He gestured south. By the end of this journey, we will reach Jerusalem just before Palm Sunday. He paused. So today matters. Claire stepped forward slightly. This morning, she said, we begin with the first station. She looked at us steadily. Jesus is condemned to death. The words settled. Not harsh, not heavy. Francis continued, after our time together, we will each go apart for private devotion. He glanced around. You will spend time in worship, simply adoring God. Then he added, you will use the SOAP method to reflect on Scripture. Lucia smiled slightly at that. Francis returned the smile. You may use passages such as Matthew 27:22 through 26, or John 19:13 through 16, the moment when Jesus is handed over. He looked around again. After that, spend time in prayer. Speak honestly with God. Bring your needs, your questions, your intercessions. He paused. Then write or draw something from what you've received, and end with gratitude. He stepped back slightly. Now, let us begin together. Colby stepped forward. The first station, he said quietly, reminds us that Jesus was condemned. He let the word linger. Condemned. Liam shifted slightly. Even though he was innocent? Yes, Colby said, completely innocent. And Pilate, who condemned him, knew it. He looked around the room, this man who had also been condemned as an innocent. Elizabeth nodded. Pilate said he knew he was innocent. Yes, Colby replied. And yet, he paused. He still handed him over. The Desert Father spoke softly. The crowd demanded it. Maria frowned. So truth didn't matter? Not in that moment, Claire said gently. Fear mattered. Pressure mattered. Reputation mattered. Sean crossed his arms. That's annoying. It should be, Elizabeth said quietly. Francis continued. We often imagine ourselves separate from that moment. He looked around as if we would have stood differently. No one spoke. But the question is not what we would have done then. He paused. It's what we do now. Colby stepped forward. When we condemn others, he said, we participate, however quietly, in that same pattern. He looked at each of us, not in the same way, but in the same spirit. The wind moved softly through the grass. Claire added, Condemnation is not always loud. Sometimes it is silent, a judgment we carry, a resentment we hold. The Desert Father spoke, or a refusal to forgive. Colby nodded. Then he added, gently but clearly, am I guilty of condemning others? He let the question settle. Do I hold anger or resentment for them in my heart? Am I vindictive? Do I forgive others as Jesus forgives? No one answered. The questions did their own work. Francis lifted his head slightly. Let us respond with a hymn. We sang, not loudly, but together. When the last note faded, Francis smiled softly. Now, he said, go and find a quiet place. I found a small rise just beyond the clearing. The ground there was warm, the wind lighter. I sat. For a moment, I simply looked. The hills stretched outward. Somewhere beyond them was Jerusalem. I closed my eyes. Lord, I didn't know what to say, so I didn't try. I just sat in his presence, adoring him, loving him, trying to nudge as close to his heart as I possibly could. I remembered when I was a child, I would lie in bed and imagine God holding me, tiny, in the palm of his hand, against his heart. I could hear his heartbeat. When I was older, I imagined dancing with him, like a father teaching his daughter, standing on his feet, close enough to hear his heartbeat. Oh, Father, I want to be close to you again, close enough to hear your heartbeat. After a while, I opened my Bible, Matthew 27. I read slowly, what shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ? Crucify him. I stopped. Let the words sit. Soap. S. Scripture. What shall I do with Jesus who is called Christ? Crucify him. Observation. Pilate knew, and still. Application. Where do I do that? Where do I know and still choose comfort? I thought of these things for a while, asked my guardian angel to show me the interior of my heart, my mind, my actions. Memories flew before me. Oh, Jesus, forgive me. Help me. Prayer. Lord, help me see myself honestly. Help me see others truly. I sat there a long time. The wind moved gently. A bird called somewhere in the distance. And then a sound, faint at first, then sharper. Barking? I froze. That bark. I stood, turned, looked, and there, running across the open ground, Pearl. Everything happened at once. Mom was on her feet before anyone else. Pearl! Her voice broke. Pearl did not slow. She ran straight toward her, full speed, absolute commitment. Mom dropped to her knees just as Pearl reached her. The impact nearly knocked her over. Pearl licked her face, her hands, her hair, everywhere at once. Mom laughed and cried at the same time. Oh my goodness! Oh my goodness, you came back! She wrapped her arms around Pearl, who could not stay still long enough to be held. Agnes darted in just behind, straight to Claire. Claire knelt and scooped her up. Lucia ran over, laughing and crying. She found us! Even the Desert Father was smiling. Colby's eyes shone. David laughed aloud. Dad shook his head in quiet amazement. Would you look at that? Francis knelt beside Pearl. He placed a hand gently on her back. She paused, just for a moment, looked at him, then resumed her joyful chaos. Sean stood back slightly, watching, then shook his head. That's incredible. Elizabeth wiped her eyes. Faithfulness, she said quietly. Aoife smiled. They knew. Liam looked between them. They came. I stood there, watching, heart full, and somewhere beneath the laughter, the joy, the astonishment, a quiet thought formed. We had just been speaking about condemnation and judgment, about the human tendency to hold things against one another. And here, two small creatures left behind, separated, without explanation, had not condemned, had not resented, had not turned away. They had simply come back, not because they understood everything, but because they knew where they belonged. The wind moved gently across the hills. The road waited, and the pilgrims stood together, more aware than before of what it means to follow.